just a reminder, please, any questions you have for Jon, please type them into the Q&A and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But before that, let's hear from Jon himself.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here again. I have to apologize if it looks like I'm looking off camera. I usually have my tablet in front of me with my outline, and I left my tablet at home, so I have it up on the screen here, but it's off center on the camera. So I don't think my eyes have become that lazy yet, but if my eyeline is weird, that's why. So today, this could fit in a couple of different series that I've done in the past. We talked about theoretical, or we went through some theoretical orientations and what those tell us about maturity. This could probably fit in there, although this isn't a theory itself. It falls under the broad umbrella of ego psychology, which is basically the self and how the self forms. So one of the, I think, current iterations of ego psychology is internal family systems. Some of you know about that, parts work. We're going to talk about the importance of having what's called an observing ego. And I call this foundational to secure functioning. So on the inside of compulsivity and reactivity, we can't fathom a different way of acting or being. That's a system that's self-contained and self-reinforcing. So I remember back in my addiction days, that feeling of like, this will never be any different didn't just come from hopelessness. It also came from like, I had never experienced really anything different in life. So to fathom living without intense craving, I didn't understand it at the time as intense emotional dysregulation, but it was. Fear, anxiety, social withdrawal, to imagine living any other way, it didn't work. I could see other people do it, and the feeling was just, I must be wired different. Because, like I said, it's self-contained and it's self-reinforcing. It's this feedback loop that feeds in on itself. And that's why when you talk to an addict early in recovery and you say, well, you just need to stop. Again, that's true, but not really helpful until that addict either hits rock bottom, starts working steps, doing inventories, sees consequences in their own life and the lives of people that they care about. Then you get some data that starts to break that self-contained shell. You'll see this with partners too. A lot of partners could go back over their whole relationship, not that they knew all along, but with what they know now, they could look back in hindsight and say, oh, that's what that was. That's what that was. That's what that was. And that fits now. So until you have like a clobbering level amount of data or a kind of data, that self-reinforced loop doesn't break and things look and feel the same way. So we aren't able to take responsibility for ourselves or relate in a pro-social way until we have an observing ego. That's what we're going to talk about. Secure functioning means, and I've said this before here, that we think about ourselves, we think about our partner, and we think about our relationships simultaneously. Now, when I start working with a new couple or an individual, I will tell them that it requires this, and very rarely do I have someone say, oh, I don't think I'm good at all three of those. And like 100% of my people who come in my door are not good at all three of those. They don't realize it yet because, again, it's one of those ways of thinking that is outside that self-reinforcing bubble. To really hold all three of those simultaneously and all at once is pretty different, I would say, from how most of us are raised or even how most of us think about ourselves. So unintegrated parts of us, without that observing ego, which I'll define here in a minute, without that observing ego, unintegrated parts of us act as filters. Or part of that, they're like the traffic directors. It loops it back to this self-reinforcing thing. Distortions that we can't recognize because we don't have the ability to see them. So in other words, the way that we see the world is altered through the lens of the self that we don't even recognize is a self separate from other parts of us. So I remember it was kind of this landmark, like for me early in my career, it was a therapy is so cool moment. When I was in module 1 of the CSAT training, and Ken Adams was training, and he brought up the question. He said, in situations like this, I ask a client, how old do you feel? And that question, I got the big point of what he was saying later, because that question was one of those like cycle piercing things for me. How old do you feel? Oh my gosh. I was like 26 at the time. And I remember feeling like, I don't think I feel like I'm 26. There was a part of me that could jump back from the cockpit view and see that there was something going on that while I was in that cockpit, I couldn't identify. I was inside of it. That's what the observing ego is. It's the part of us that can see and evaluate our actions from the outside. It's also the part of us, because we can detach from ourselves to a degree, it's also the part of us that can see and observe another's actions from what we imagine the inside might be. So it's this part of us that can detach from judgment. It's a part of us that can detach, uh, separate to a degree from emotion in the moment. So it's the part of us that feels our feelings without becoming them. It's the part of us that can see and experience others as separate from us. So again, like nobody on the planet, I think, goes around and saying that person is literally an extension of me. Yet, if you listen to how some people talk, if you observe how some people act, that is actually the conclusion that you come to. This person thinks and acts like there is no difference between this person, this other person, and themselves. So we see and experience others as separate from us. This might mean that we don't ascribe self-referencing motives. So, for example, I work with couples on this all the time. You don't feel like having sex with me right now because you're not attractive, or you're not attracted to me. That comes from a blended self-referencing part. The only reason why I can think that sex is not happening the way that I might like it to, or I think it should, is because you must not be attracted to me. My fault. It's about me. Versus with an observing ego, you may be able to say you have your own reasons for not feeling that way, or feeling the way that you do, and they may have nothing to do with me. So observing ego is not so detached that there is no self involved. It's this possibility. Could be about me, could not be about me. This anger I feel could be the only emotion I have going on right now. It could be a part of what I'm feeling right now. So the observing ego is the part of us that can like zoom back and see the possibility of some alternatives. Again, a watershed moment for me when I was in my early 20s getting therapy as an adult for the first time. I was talking to my therapist, eccentric guy with long white hair. He kept in a ponytail, and he always had a scrunchie that kept his ponytail back that matched the socks he was wearing. So we're sitting in his office, and I can't remember what. I mean, we were talking about emotions, and he said our emotions are like this office. Now he had knickknacks galore. Like it's the stuff when I was early in my therapy career. I was like, I'm going to have a clean therapy office without these knickknacks. I have knickknacks everywhere now. And they each have some kind of like, again, just ego referencing, this reminder to me of something important. Um, and he said, do you notice how full of do you notice every moment how full my office is of stuff? And I said, no. And he said, why is that? And I said, well, I'm either paying attention to you or I'm paying attention to, whatever I'm looking at. And he said, our emotions work the same way. It's not that we feel just one way. It's that we may have our sphere of awareness on one set of emotions or experience. That doesn't mean that the others are unavailable to us or inaccessible. They are there. They're just not commanding our attention. So the observing ego is the part of us that can be aware of that. Right now, I feel so angry. Right now, I feel so lonely. Right now, I really want to act out. And there's an awareness of, or an openness to, there's the possibility of other feelings right now. It's the part of us that can observe objectively without immediate judgments. It provides ourselves with real choices, not the way that a lot of us think in a less mature ego state. You've left me with one choice. That is almost never true. Almost never true, to the point that if I hear somebody say it, there's a big part of me that thinks, are you sure? Are you sure you have no other choice? That believes that to the point that when I hear somebody say that, not as a disrespect to anything they've thought through or worked through, that I challenge them. Well, let's look at that, because it's almost never true. So the observing ego is like, in IFS terms, it's the self. It's compassionate, curious, observant, fair. In IFS terms, it's the part of us that like chairs the board table with all of our other parts. Shame part, you seem quite activated. Is there something you need to say? I hear you. Got the message. Anger part, seems like there's something for you to say. It's the part of us that can shift attention because it's merged with or attached at the hip to nothing. So when we talk about detachment, we're not talking about numbness. We're not talking about checking out. We're talking about the ability to see that everything that we feel or think or experience is temporary. Which is, I would say, that's baseline truth. That doesn't mean that it's not long lasting or not intense. You hear the detachment there for the observing ego. So why this matters in relationships? Without an observing ego, we're driven by burdened parts and projections from the past. Again, one of those first observing ego questions that came across my plate: how old do you feel? That question did so much lifting for me and my clients early on in my career, early on in my therapy journey. Oh, I feel like I'm 6. And in that, even just in that frame of mind, I could start to feel there's a difference between how my body felt when I was 6 and how my body felt now that I'm in my mid-20s, or now I'm pushing 40. Where do you feel that in your body is another observing ego question. So when we're consumed by an emotion, I become that emotion. There is no, oh, here's where it's located. It's, no, I just feel shame. Where do you feel it in your body? It's actually localized. It's right here. Little bit of distance. So when we have an observing ego, we aren't just driven by our emotions and feelings, which, by the way, our brains are designed to react to that. It's called a heuristic. If we had to expend energy every time there was a new situation or a new scenario or a new emotion, starting from the ground up, what is this? Where have I seen it before? How does it feel? What should I do? We would die. It's not adaptive in the face of danger. So instead, we've learned to, or not learned, but we've evolved to experience emotion, which carries kind of a packet of data. When I feel scared, I'm probably going to have more of an avoidance set of behaviors. I probably am not going to look too closely at things or hang around too long to get hurt. Now, every time I'm scared, is that the appropriate response? No. What if I do that with my kid who gets hurt? So the emotions are just a starting place. The observing ego can help us identify. It's like I had to do some first aid training this year. And the thing they hammer in before you do anything, you check the scene. Is it safe? And when I went to go pass off my skills, the teacher that was passing off the skills said, "I need everyone to exaggerate. I'm checking the scene. Is it safe?" Again, there's some observing ego. I can stop. I can really check it out. What's going on here? It's funny because we were in a yoga studio and we had like the CPR dummies, and so there was like 8, 10 of us, something like that. So she said, let's imagine all of you come in this scene. You're in this yoga studio in this basement of this very old, like historical mansion. And you see 8 people passed on the floor. What's the first thing you do? And I thought, well, the first thing I do is get out of here because there's a gas leak or something and I'm going to end up on the floor. But again, that observing ego can evaluate, really evaluate, not just from the threads of the past. It matters because we ultimately make others and circumstances outside of our control responsible for our safety, security, and need fulfillment without an observing ego. So when it's I am angry or I am not safe versus there's a part of me that feels very angry right now, there's a part of me that's not safe. When it's I am this, there is no ability to turn inward and deal with that part. I feel like I'm 6 and it's your fault. Grow me up is what we do in relationships without the observing ego versus being able to say, I feel like I'm 6. I am the loving parent of my own inner child. What are the steps I need to take so that I can feel safe and less vulnerable? Then we've got business to conduct. Then we need to figure some things out. That doesn't mean I'm not advocating here that the observing ego takes care of all your relationship needs, but it helps you see the entire outlay of the land. Yes, you're treating me poorly, and that is your responsibility. I've regressed to feel like a 6-year-old again, and that is my responsibility. It's the part of the relationship puzzle, or I would say, sorry, it matters because our part of the relationship puzzle will be unsolvable or will be consigned to a role that we're trapped in. There's no agency without observing ego and the ability to monitor ourselves accurately, to consider not just from an empathetic standpoint, but like if I were watching this from the outside, what impact are my actions having on this other person? And number one, am I okay with that impact? And number two, is that impact helpful for what I'm trying to accomplish? So my observing ego probably 6 times a day alerts me to a tone that I want to use with my 12-year-old, like almost all the time. And when that observing ego can pull back and I can hear how I sound to him, oh, I can see that that's not helpful, and I can see it's my problem. It's not his defensiveness. I'm using that tone again. I haven't had a soft enough startup. The observing ego working with another's observing ego allows us to actually assess and solve problems in a helpful way. This is my current favorite game to play with couples. Do the autopsy. So when they come in distress, we had this event, we had this fight, we haven't been able to work through it. Tell us what to do, and they want to launch into here's what's happened, and I'll tell them stop. We're not going to go to what we should do about this until I see you two talk about exactly what happened. How did we get here? And then the next favorite place to go is, well, you blah 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 blah. Say stop. How much do you feel willing to play ball when it starts with the finger pointing at your partner? How anxious are you for what your partner has to say? What do you predict they're going to say? And I'll tell them it works better if you turn yourself in, and then we really get somewhere. Okay, well, I can see on Thursday night when I started to talk to you, or I said this or that. I don't think that felt very good for you. And then we ran into that thing that we always do, which we're trying to figure out who's right instead of what's right. So 2 people with an observing ego can really put some useful components on the table to start understanding what's happening in the relationship and what they're going to do about it. So some pointers for developing the observing ego. It's not a part that we are born with. It's not a skill that just comes naturally. We have to develop it. First, I would say don't ever assume that you have a functional observing ego. The minute you start to say, I got this, I'm online, I can see it all, that's the minute that you are in a giant cognitive error and it's going to come back to bite you. So this is less of a skill or a tool that you take on board, and it's more of a frame of mind. I constantly have to check in with myself this way, or I constantly have to use this because the voice of our observing ego changes over time. As a kid, we're going to narrate feeling afraid, even from the outside. We're going to narrate it differently than when we're an adult. We're going to feel it differently than when we're adult. So you have to keep up on practices like this, so that I would say, so that I mean, it's like a radio broadcast that keeps changing frequency. And so you have to have some practices that help you attune to the dial and really find, oh, yep, there's that part of me that can observe. So first, I would say practice emotional intelligence and awareness. Stop justifying your avoidance of emotions. They exist, they're important, they are not less than logic. If you think any differently than that, um, you have a world of relational hurt in front of you. You have a world of personal hurt in front of you. Now, how one person says to do emotions is not what works for everybody or how everybody connects. You have to find your own connection with your emotions. So emotional intelligence and awareness. Can I name the faces that my face makes? Can I name my internal states? Can I identify situations that generally make me feel angry, hurt, afraid, happy, sad? Can I identify the emotions that are easy for me to take on? At a time in my life, that was nothing or anger. And can I identify the emotions that I have a really, really hard time with? So there's the negative ones. There's also some of the more positive, intense ones. I have a hard time with joy. My wife really loves to dance. You put her on a dance floor and she's a dancing fool, like totally inhabits it. I get so self-conscious in a setting like that, even when I want to do it. So that's some basics for emotional intelligence. Have some helpful ways for discharging feeling and emotion. So by discharge, I mean feeling and emotion puts an energy in our body, and there has to be a physical release. It's a real energy that goes in there. It's a tension in the muscles. You have to be able to shake it out. And these ways of discharging emotions, this is something I see for sex and porn addicts that makes it so clear that it's an emotion regulation problem. Think about how state shifting acting out sexually is. That's what it's all about. So you have to have ways on your own that are healthy, non-destructive, that you can shift states. Contrast showers, exercising, walking, talking, shaking it out. Somatic-based hobbies. I crochet, I knit, yoga, stretching. Brene Brown calls them the SFD, the crappy first draft. That's where when you're feeling something really, really intense and you need to talk to another person about it, know that your first draft is going to be terrible. It's not going to be helpful, but it needs to be written anyway. You have to have a starting place where you're, again, in observing ego terms, I'm accepting all parts of me in this. Calls to sponsor. Make sure that your calls to sponsors and people in program include containment after the discharge. So all too often, I'll hear from my clients as they are, figuring out the right level of transparency with their partner. I talked with my sponsor about how difficult it is to report on my sobriety to my spouse. And my sponsor said, "Why are you reporting your sobriety to your spouse?" That's not containment after discharge. That's avoidance after discharge. Containment is maybe after that discharge, gosh, this is so hard. I'm not figuring it out. I wish she wanted something different or he wanted something different. Containment is, why are you committed to this? Why does this matter? Why are you barking up that tree? Have you considered all of the other options? And what do you think about those? So containment, again, is getting that observing ego online. Containment is not rules. Containment is not advice. Containment is getting that part of us that can observe back online, observing things. Journaling helps a ton in developing the observing ego, especially when you let yourself write what you feel inside. There's parts of myself that I didn't start to connect with until I started writing. And I'd have this voice in me come up and I'd just start writing what it was saying. And it was almost like, I was dictating for some other kind of entity, but it was me, of course. Step work, I think, is fantastic for the observing ego. Think of all the inventories that you do. You know, you hear all these examples of lies, deceit, manipulation, less than impeccable behavior. Um, the steps that, like the 4-step inventory, assets and liabilities. What a great way to develop that part of you that can observe from the outside and from the inside what this looks like, what this feels like. This is something kind of cool I learned in the last couple of weeks. Talking to yourself in the third person internally does the same thing that journaling does neurologically. It creates a distance. So you may start to think about your feelings or think about what's going on. John went to the store today and the cashier was rude. John feels anxious. John feels tired. It reminds me of, what was that episode of Seinfeld, the guy that talked to Jimmy from the gym? Um, Not to make you an egomaniac. Again, it's an internal thing that just, it helps create some of that distance and that observing. Therapy that's focused, individual therapy that's focused on your own internal world. So many of you in betrayal trauma therapy, in early on addiction recovery, you do have to focus on some external stabilization. Make sure that there's also a balance of internal world, understanding your own emotions, feelings, and patterns. Not just focused on what has to change out here so you can feel safe. That actually supports the non-observing ego. That supports a childlike part that needs the world to be a certain way in order for them to be safe, versus the part that can look at your real options, that you can turn inward first and take care of yourself. Lastly, I would say don't be afraid of accountability. Embrace it. If you want the staying power of observing ego, if you really want to see cash in the bank, own your mistakes. Do it quickly, do it fairly, do it in an accountable way. I'm sorry, that's my bad. That tone I know is not okay. Try again. That more than anything, I think, puts you on solid footing, because shame, that thing that says I am bad, I'm wrong, I only make mistakes, is obliterated when you stop running from the mistakes that you make and you start owning them. So that is observing ego, why it's foundational to secure functioning. And hopefully some of those steps are some things you can start to use and maybe see some de-escalation in relationship, intense, non-helpful relationship dynamics. Again, not by prescribing for your partner, but developing a part of you that can detach a bit from the internal runaway train.
So, John, I have buttons that, get pushed and they turn me into the insecure, shame-based, manipulated, objectified 14-year-old boy, or the 6-year-old boy with no autonomy, or whatever. Those buttons get pushed inadvertently, usually in this stage of my life. And I immediately have my PTSD, defensive, reactive, shame spiral reaction. Is there a way, I'm speaking more generally than just me, obviously, is there a way for someone in that state? The button has been pushed and the old coping mechanism, which is not coping at all, it's just going into the shame spiral or it's getting defensive. Is there a way to get out of that and into an observing ego that can slow things down and calm things down?
Yeah, and I would say it's not so much traveling to observing ego. I think it's more enacting the observing ego off the get-go. So last week, Friday night, I took a bit of a crisis call from a client that I work with. Something really upsetting had happened. And I could feel the escalation. And I just started to ask questions like, where are you feeling it most in your body? What is it making you think about? What are the options it's bringing up for you? So I was asking questions that only the observing ego could answer, right? And that's kind of what it takes for most of us. Is it's not a matter of like, how can I slow this down so the observing ego can come in? Can I just start to be with myself it's the whole trauma packet that comes in. I feel like I'm 14 again. Well, where? Well, I feel a fluttery in my chest. My stomach has dropped. I'm starting to feel flush on my face. And sometimes I've been with people where that starts to happen and it's so intense they don't even have the words for it. And I'll just tell them, can you just put a hand where you feel it? And you'll start to see this. And again, that's only a question. Well, can you point to where it hurts? Can you point to where it's uncomfortable? That's only a question that the observing ego can answer. So it's these little Stan Tatkin says it this way: our brains trick us all the time, and if you know how the brain works, you can trick it into doing better. And I don't mean like trick my like manipulate it or like it doesn't matter. It's okay, I know this process. I'm getting carried away with the emotion. I'm all of the anxiety versus anxiety is largely right here. So it's some grounding techniques, it's some distraction techniques that really again the questions that only the observing ego can ask is part of how you invite it to be aware.
Yeah. So the trick is to either have somebody like you who knows the questions to ask, or to have somebody like you who can teach me the questions to ask myself.
Yeah, so I would actually, if you struggle with this, get out a pen and paper right now and write down this list. Where do I feel it in my body? Where have I felt this before?
Yeah.
How intense is it on a scale from 0 to 10? What does this make me want to do? What does this make me want to say? Um, in my experience, does this feeling ever get better, and how? Right there, and those are all things that I'm spitballing. There's nothing scientific
Right.
about it. It's just in that, like, those are observational questions.
Yeah.
Um, it's just like when we learn what a trigger is or a craving is, and we start to label it. I really don't want to go act out. I'm having intense craving because I'm probably anxious, or I'm having intense craving. And, on day one, it's like whenever I crave, I'm supposed to call my sponsor before I act out. It's this externalization.
Yeah. So there's a conscious externalization before the fact, so
Yeah.
that when I get hit, I'm prepared. Okay, I need to ask these are the questions that are how old do you feel is going to be on my list every time.
Yeah.
Where in the body is going to be on my list every time. I mean,
These skills are best when they're practiced when you don't need them.
right,
Be familiar. Like those would be great journaling prompts or great meditation prompts.
right.
The more you use it, the more likely it is that you'll think about it in these really activated times.
Okay. Thank you. Those of you who couldn't scribble fast enough to write those questions down, I will get this webinar posted on our Seeking Integrity YouTube channel later today, so you can go back and revisit that. Um, let's jump into the Q&A feature. We've got some questions in here. Betrayed partner, 4 years since discovery. We are both in individuals and couples therapy post full therapeutic disclosure. My partner consistently has challenges for years with not repairing after rupture. We have a mutually agreed upon commitment that resolution or plan for resolution be communicated within 24 hours. We had one on Tuesday, and again, he is not honoring his commitment. Says it's because of his ADHD, but I think it's more. What do I do for my part of this dynamic? That's part one of two. And then part two of two is I'm less interested in trying to figure out him. I just don't want to overfunction, and I want to still heal as much as I can, regardless of how he shows up. I find I go into despair that this will ever change, but also know this mindset is not helpful for rebuilding. I feel so stuck as I long for a partnership that is emotionally connective and relational. I have trouble knowing what my limit is. I feel like I could do this forever, but I'm having a hard time reconciling his words with his inactions. And this came in like early in the conversation,
Yeah.
but it's so on point.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. So a couple things to look at there. First of all, there isn't an excuse for not keeping your commitments or taking them seriously. I think there are some reasons, not excuses, but there are some reasons why we don't forget, or why we forget, why we don't remember. or we may not do it quick, but they cannot become get out of jail free cards. The answer to, hey, it's been 24 hours, this happened Tuesday, what's the repair plan? If it's like, yeah, sorry, ADHD brain, that's not where the conversation stops. It's, I'm doing it right now. I'm getting on this right now. Priority number one, I realize I made a commitment to you. I have to take that seriously. If I forgot and I'm reminded, no excuses. I just do it. Anyone can do secure functioning. Anyone can keep commitments. Now, that doesn't mean that that will just happen because anyone can do it. It does take a level of investment. It does take I mean, when it comes down to it, it takes a level of interest in having a relationship that works a certain way. So, like Scott mentioned, this is very apropos of what we've talked about today. When you want to know what's my part in this, what's my limit, I think you have to turn inward and you have to ask yourself, how well can I do in a relationship where a partner does not have urgency about my feelings and needs? You could argue, and I'm not saying it's an excuse, this could go back to attachment style. I talk with couples all the time about waves, islands, and anchors. There's nothing pathological about attachment style. If it's non-secure, there's nothing pathological about it. It's just differences. And no matter how long we've been together and how much we've talked about it, we will never internalize each other 100% with accuracy. So I think you have to look at your willingness to keep fighting for this particular relationship dynamic, your willingness to hold space open for you being in charge of this need being met. So that may mean I'm going to have to remind you often that my timeline is a lot shorter than yours. I'm going to have to remind you, just because I'm not talking about it doesn't mean that the hurt goes away. Maybe your partner's more islandish and that's actually how they think it works. Again, that's attachment based. And on the inverse side or the converse side, whichever it would be, as partners, we are responsible for being good wranglers of our other, not in charge of, but like people who bring animals onto Hollywood sets, that animal inside and out, their behavior, you're an expert in it, and you can get them to do what they're supposed to do in a way that they're happy to do it. That's the reality. That's the stopgap for how different we are as partners. So there's the part I'd have you look at is let's assume that nothing changes with my partner. How interested am I in reminding? How interested am I in saying, hey, this repair is still important. I need you to take some steps. And then I think you have to ask yourself, how willing does my partner how willing does my partner appear to be to actually play ball with that? So when the reminder comes, do they own the gaps in their memory? Do they own their deficit and say, I'm so sorry. I know it's your least favorite thing to remind me. I'm on it right now. I will do that right now. Or do they fight it? Do they make excuses? Because relationships cannot function, they cannot exist well if there's any level of entitlement, which means I get to show up and be who I am and just do what I want to do, and it should be fine for you. That's relationship entitlement. It's not that the focus of relationships is to fundamentally change who we are, but again, here's some of that observing ego. I can recognize the parts of me that don't play well relationally, and they're so natural to me. They come easy. In fact, they might even be my preferred way of being. The observing ego can look at that and say, I love you, I accept you, you don't play well with my marriage, so I don't let you close to it. Or if you do get in with my marriage, I take full responsibility. I did it, I messed on the floor. That's not okay that I do this. It's not the same as saying I'm a piece of crap and I'll never be good enough for you. It's taking responsibility, accountability, because we all have those aspects of ourselves. It's part of what wonderfully makes us who we are, but that does not automatically mean that it's going to be the part of us we want center stage helping us in our relationship, because it may just not be good at that. That answer is helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Next question here. If you have questions, we got a little time left. We've got one more question here. So if you got one, type it in. This is from a betrayed partner whose ex-spouse chose his addiction plus more. So we divorced after being married for 33 years. He had porn addiction when we married, but did not share with me until separation. Of course not. I have a CSAT I see weekly and still attend many of these types of calls weekly. I'm struggling thinking how my addict still blames me for all his addictions. I'm not perfect, but I really tried to be my best self so that I didn't contribute to his addiction. But the more I fear I might have without knowing. I hate knowing he blames me or that I may have contributed to his problems. Any suggestions for things I can do to get through these feelings?
Another one that came in early that is so on point with what we're talking about. If you're looking at this from an external thing, you'd get advice that would encourage you to discount where your partner's coming from. Well, they must be crazy because they're blaming you. They must be crazy because they're not in stable recovery, which could all be valid. I think ultimately what's helpful here, can you turn inward to that part that under this kind of scrutiny or that under this kind of pressure starts to feel like the solution is to take responsibility for all of it. Maybe it is my fault. Maybe I did cause this. Maybe he's right. It's not about whether or not that's objectively true. It's about which part of you uses that language to let you know that they are hurting.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had a little kid, if you had a child who said this same thing. Mom, you were upset with me last night at bedtime because I'm a bad kid. I mean, we heard this from our 3-year-old, 4-year-old now. She's always known about her adoption. She has a picture book with pictures of her birth parents and aunts and uncles and things like that we could find. We're trying to gather family stories so that she has a sense of part of where she came from. And you can hear her trying to put together the story of why adoption. So she is an energetic, precocious little girl. She has a penchant for getting into more trouble than she can solve herself. So the other day, she said, when I was born, I lived with another family and I was too naughty. So I had to leave and I had to come live here. Again, here's that responsibility narrative. How do you respond as a parent to that? Honey, no, 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 no. You didn't have to leave because you were naughty. That's not how it worked. You could never be that naughty that you have to leave your family. That's not how families work. How our family. And we went through the story again. This is how your birth parents came to the decision to make an adoption plan for you. This is how we found you. This is how we love you. So it's that same turning in when you hear a part of yourself speak from that much shame and that much hurt, you have to deal with it. What does self say to the part of you that starts to feel responsible? You are never responsible for another person's choices. I'm sorry they're hurting you so much. Self might even say, I've had this talk with my older kids, facing friend problems at school. What do other people say about you? Yeah, this one person has a problem with you. They're not happy with you. What do other people say about you? Again, only a question the observing ego can answer. Oh, my teachers really like me. This friend thinks I'm really funny. Yeah, yeah. It's all of that, isn't it? So I would encourage here the turning inward, deal with that part that wants to become responsible. Ask, why do you feel like you have to be responsible? What scares you about this situation? What's the worst thing that could happen? And then be with that part like you would your own child. Help them through it rather than the unexamined burden, I would call it.
Yeah. And I will simply add, as an addict, my MO was to blame other people. I really wanted all my problems to be someone else's fault, because if I admitted they were my fault, then I would have to, it was confirming all the shame I had about myself. I'm a terrible person. I'm unworthy of love, all that stuff. Um, so if anybody was near me willing to take blame, boy, I'd let them. And nobody ever held a gun to my head and said, Scott, get drunk, get high, look at porn for 6 hours, pay for sex. Nobody held a gun to my head and did that. And my problems were the way I chose to cope with emotions. So if you're a betrayed partner out there and you find yourself wanting to take on blame, please don't. Please, please, please don't. Nothing you did or didn't do caused his addiction or furthered his addiction.
It's one of those, I think, truths about being an adult that of course there's exceptions, but these prove the rule. No one can make you do anything.
Right.
And again, like I said, there's exceptions to that, but those are the exceptions that prove the rule. The fact that we look at that and say, well, what about means that, yeah, like 99.9% of the time, no one can make you do anything as an adult. It's you. It's up to you it's your choices. It's how you're choosing to live your life.
Yeah. I love this next question. Can acquiring ego observing, so can developing, the observing ego decrease the fragile ego of narcissistic traits that overlap with sex addiction? My husband's in SA, has a sponsor, is at beginning stages of step work. So can the observing ego decrease those narcissistic traits?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, that is, I think, one of the only things that puts narcissistic traits in check
Yeah.
is that part of you that can say, how's this going to go over in a relationship? What does this feel like to another person? What does this even sound like from the outside? Again, I'll turn myself in a little bit, probably 15 times a day. There's thoughts and feelings I have come up that I would just like to express, and I'll think, how's this going to sound to another person? And often when I'm checking that, the answer is you're going to sound like an a-hole. You're going to sound pretty self-important and self-involved. Um, Feeling good about yourself, feeling proud of your accomplishments is one thing. To parade those around in a certain way, to use them to attract attention is another.
Yeah.
So absolutely, that observing ego can totally help decrease.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things you said was the observing ego forces us to look at ourselves, which is mostly what we talked about, but also to be aware of not just self, but other person and relationship. It pulls us out of the one person system. A one person system is narcissism. you know, it gets us out of that. So yeah, absolutely. Um, 2 years out from my D-Day, and my porn addict partner is still resistant to doing a full therapeutic disclosure, which I had initially felt was non-negotiable. The sobriety has not been 100% via weekly SA meetings. Weekly, once a week is not enough, but has been mostly consistent as far as I know. Is me insisting this is a boundary I won't compromise and moving towards separation the best or only course of action for me at this point?
Of course not, but it also might be. And that's where I think you have a decision to make. I've worked with lots of people before in your position that full therapeutic disclosure becomes like this serious, non-serious uh, threat or milestone. And by that, I mean, we will say this is non-negotiable, but we don't act like it is. So I think you have to make a decision. Do you actually need this? And is it going to be non-negotiable? If so, make it non-negotiable.
Right.
Have the boundary and response in place, ready to go. You're ready to enact that. Stop threatening.
Yeah.
Or if it is negotiable, I think at this point I will be fine. I don't think I need this. Then drop it as a bargaining chip. Decide whether or not this is a hill you're going to die on, or whether or not you can actually see a path forward for yourself in your relationship without
Yeah. Um,
it. A
ego
good path
observation.
forward, by
Oh,
the way.
yeah. This is new for me. Doesn't this ego observation involve emotional intelligence, insight, awareness, and maturing?
I would say it's how those things are accomplished. It's like I said, it's a foundational building block for relationships. Maturity is the word I find myself using the most to describe whether or not a behavior clears the bar for secure functioning. So the observing ego is how maturity happens. It's how insight is developed. It's simply being able to cultivate and listen to the voice inside you that says, "How do you think that came across? What do you think that sounds like?"
Okay, I think this is a two-parter here. Um, we are separated due to my spouse lying about his recovery for 3.5 years, and he's blaming me for the separation and not being able to touch or kiss me. What is your response, or what should my response be? I told him me not touching him and kissing him is a direct consequence to his behavior and choices.
If we're again ego strength perspective, I'd say you're damn right. You're damn right. This is on me. I do not feel like it would be a good idea for me to be close and affectionate with someone who has fundamentally been dishonest
Yeah,
and won't take responsibility for his actions. You're right. That's a choice that I'm making to not continue with you as if nothing had happened. That created a struggle in me that is not resolved. This is what feels responsible to me. So a lot of times, again, in that lack of ego strength, we don't want to be seen as the bad guy. We don't want to be seen in a negative light. Um, Ego strength allows us to see that in adulthood there are choices that we make that are not popular but are right nonetheless. This would be one of those.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I almost, I deal with addicts. I don't deal with betrayed partners, so I always get the addict end of this, and constantly in early work group stuff, usually by week 2, we're talking about denial. And they're saying, well, my wife doesn't have sex with me anymore. It's a sexless marriage. I'm like, and they're blaming the wife. And let's say, why is it a sexless marriage? You know, is it a sexless marriage because she doesn't trust you, doesn't feel safe with you because you've been lying to her for the last decade and a half? Um, of course, I mean, if you were in her shoes, wouldn't you make that same decision? You know,
And I think it's also helpful to say, okay, then why didn't you tell her ahead of time? I'm not getting the sex that I want in the way that I want. I'm going to use porn, or I'm going to go find a partner
right,
that I can have the kind of sex with I want to. And I want to stay married to you. Why didn't you go through the front door on that?
right,
That would also be that would be secure, that would be honest. And the answer would come back to, I mean, on both, it would be, yeah, I'm not taking responsibility for myself. That's my problem.
yeah, yeah. And addicts are notorious for not taking responsibility for themselves, and and doing things like, well, you know, I don't think my wife would care if I look at porn. Well, why are you keeping it secret from her?
Yeah.
I don't think my wife cares if I get a lap dance. Well, why don't you ask her beforehand or tell her afterward? Well, I don't want to hurt her. Oh, so she does care.
She does care.
Addicts are notorious for, I mean, we're just horrible
Well,
to people around us
it's
to
it's
make
that
our, yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry.
it's that first point I made. It's this self-contained, self-reinforcing bubble
Yeah,
that it does get burst when we actually start to listen to ourselves, when we actually start to play things through beyond one assumption. And that's again, that's the work of developing that observing ego. In that line of questioning for you, Scott, you are being the external observing ego and you're walking a sponsee or somebody through. Okay, well, all right, let's go on that assumption. So then why didn't you tell her about it?
right.
Are you keeping it a secret? Only
Yeah,
the question that only the observing ego can answer.
yeah. So, okay, we're out of time. There's one, he's in denial. I think this must be a follow-up, even
Yeah.
though diagnosed. I think this is about narcissism. He has a hard time with the word narcissist, but admits to being a sex addict. Any thoughts on that, John?
Narcissist is one of those diagnoses now that I think's been done to death a little bit, and it's kind of made it inaccessible. I like Craig Malkin's work on this, where he talks about this spectrum, and he says there's egoism, there's unhealthy narcissism, and in the middle is narcissism. which is our ability to have a correctly inflated and appropriately inflated sense of self. So when I think of narcissism, I'm thinking of that spectrum from the middle to the overinflated, which is something all of us have the capacity for. Some are more aware of it and self-checking than others. But it is totally possible to develop that internal monitor that can say that narcissistic part of me is out of control right now. Again, ego strength, observing ego. I have this, I am not this. I think is the most helpful way to deal with any of that stuff.
Yeah. And usually when I will say when my narcissism kicks in, it's because my shame has kicked in.
Yeah.
You know, my observing ego knows I'm acting really narcissistically, and it's because the part of me that's activated is the shame part. Um, you know, or the feeling used part. Either way, I get really self-centered. So, um, got time for one more, John? Or are
Sure.
we're over? All right. Betraying partner here, you mentioned entitlement as a non-starter for relational growth. How can I address entitlement grandiosity? Also, when my emotional regulation is the issue, as you said, how do you recommend managing the roller coaster of emotions when I've used pacifiers my whole life? How do I alert myself to note the emotions proactively?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think it starts with I love this self-diagnosis here. Um, I have a problem regulating my emotions. I've used pacifiers my whole life. Identify that. Don't be afraid to see it happening real time. Don't be afraid to announce it. It's the only way that it gets better.
yeah,
There's me without my pacifier again. I'm learning. I got to figure this out. Addressing the entitlement and the grandiosity. Remember that we get nothing in a relationship that we don't work for. So if I want a partner to be kind, sensitive, sweet to me, am I doing the same? Am I paying up? Am I leading by example? That's part of how you address the grandiosity and the entitlement. Also, flip it. What I'm wanting here, if my partner wanted the same thing from me, would I feel like that is fair? Does my partner think that what I want is fair? Because again, if we don't have fairness at the core of our relationship and the experience, it's not somewhere that we want to be. I'm trying to make sure I get all these. Managing the roller coaster of emotions. I've used it. Get experimenting. Come up with a list as many ways as you can. If you Google DBT emotion regulation ideas or something like that, you could find a bunch of PDFs lists, just things to try.
yeah.
You have to start experimenting